dude hurries by as he catches the poor old lady's eyes. Just for fun, he says, get a job. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. Oh, but don't you believe them? Say, hey, little boy, you can't go where the others go, 'cause you don't look like they do. I said, hey, old man, how can you stand to think that way? But did you really think about it before you made the rules? And he said, son, that's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. Oh, but don't you believe them? Well, they passed a law in '64 to give those who ain't got a little more. But it only goes so far, 'cause the law don't change another's mind when all it sees at the hiring time is a line on the color bar. No, that's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. It is, it is, it is.
Good morning. Welcome to the Boise Unitarian Universalist Fellowship's Zoom worship service. I'm Debra Smith, your celebrant for today's service. Whether you are zooming in from down the road, across the city, from another state, or across the ocean, you are welcome here. Whatever faiths you have known or religious practices you embody, if any, you are welcome here. Whoever you love and however you identify, you are welcome here. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Our minister, the Reverend Sarah Lawal, is on vacation. In today's service, beloved member Mark McGinnis reflects on the racism that was present in his family's history. He considers the effect of guilt in our country's persistent racism, and he speaks of hope in our country's evolving awareness of the pernicious harm racism causes. He looks at the concept of white privilege and suggests what white people can do in this, what he calls our time of atonement. It is our practice here at the Fellowship to donate 25% of our unpledged plate offering to support our social justice ministries. For the month of August, it is Booth's own Pay It Forward Fund, or PIF. Established by the Reverend Elizabeth Green, the Pay It Forward Fund was created approximately 13 years ago to address a need among our own Booth community for short-term emergency financial assistance. PIF is funded through the generosity of those members and friends who donate this month. Over the years, funds have helped members and friends stay in their homes, pay for groceries, utilities, medical expenses, and other basic needs of living. We will have a special time in the service for you to make your contribution, but you can access our website to make your gift anytime during the service or after it. Now, breathe with me. Become present and prepare to take in the message of Holly Near's lyrics performed by Mike Lemieux.
I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up to the light of change. There is hurting in my family, there is sorrow in my town, there is panic all across the nation, there is wailing the whole world round. For I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up to the light of change. May the children see more clearly, may the elders be more wise, may the winds of change caress us, even though it burns our eyes. For I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up to the light of change. Give me a mighty oak to hold my confusion, give me a desert to hold my fears, and give me a sunset to hold my wonder, give me an ocean to hold my tears. For I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. Oh, lift me up to the light of change.
We dedicate this reading of the Song of Prudence by Walt Whitman to the memory of Congressman John Lewis, who lived his life in full awareness of the immortal consequences of a person's and a society's actions. All that a person does, says, thinks is of consequence. Not a move can a man or woman makes that affects him or her in a day, month, any part of the direct lifetime or the hour of death. But the same affects him or her onward, afterward, through the indirect lifetime.
The indirect is just as much as the direct. The spirit receives from the body just as much as it gives to the body, if not more.
Not one word or deed, but has results beyond death, as really as before death.
Charity and personal force are the only investments worth anything.
No specification is necessary. All that a male or female does that is vigorous, benevolent, clean, is so much profit to him or her in the unshakable order of the universe and through the whole scope of it forever.
Who has been wise receives interest. The interest will come round. All will come round.
Singly, wholly, to affect now, affect their time, will affect forever. All the past and all the present and all of the future. All the brave actions of war and peace. All help given to relatives, strangers, the poor, old, sorrowful, young children, widows, the sick, and to the shunned persons. All self-denial that stood steady and aloof on wrecks and saw others fill the seats of the boats. All offerings of substance or life for the good old cause. All that has been manfully begun, whether it succeeded or no. All suggestions of the divine mind of man or the divinity of his mouth or the shaping of his great hands. All that is well thought or said this day on any part of the globe. These inure, have inured, shall inure to the identities from which they sprang or shall spring.
Did you guess anything lived only its moment? The world does not so exist. No parts palpable or impalpable so exist. No consummation exists without being from some long previous consummation, and that from some other, without the farthest conceivable one coming a bit nearer the beginning than any.
Whatever satisfies the soul is true. Prudence entirely satisfies the craving and glut of souls. Itself only finally satisfies the soul. The soul has that measureless pride which revolts from every lesson but its own.
What is prudence is indivisible, declines to separate one part of life from every part, divides not righteous from the unrighteous, or living from the dead, matches every thought or act by its correlative, knows no possible forgiveness or deputed atonement.
knows that the young man who composedly periled his life and lost it has done exceedingly well for himself without doubt, that he who never periled his life but retains it to old age in riches and ease has probably achieved nothing for himself worth mentioning, knows that only that person has really learned, who has learned to prefer results, who favors body and soul the same, who perceives the indirect assuredly follows the direct, who in his spirit in any emergency, whatever, neither hurries nor avoids death. May our actions be guided by moral bravery. May we composedly transcend our fear and pettiness to meet the challenges of this challenging time. In this spirit, we come to worship together. If you have a chalice, I invite you to light it now while I light our own. You may write in the conversation or chat box, a chalice is lit on whatever street or lane where you live. Turn your settings to gallery view to see the beauty of this congregation on full display.
I invite our children to come a little closer to your screens to listen for our time for all ages this morning. Today, we're thinking about the ways that we treat our neighbors. Sometimes we face inconvenience or misunderstanding or being outright unkind to one another. When we feel hurt, we might tell ourselves stories about what other people's actions mean in a way that just makes us ourselves feel good instead of helping us feel connected to our neighbors and other people in our community. We are all taught racism and a lot of different oppressions from the time we are born forward. It is very often in the stories we tell ourselves about what being hurt or being harmed looks like, who deserves punishment, and which of our neighbors are trustworthy. I wonder, how can we interrupt our own anger and remember how to be in good relationships with each other? Let's see what our story has to tell us. The story this morning is Hannah in the Wind and the Wind. She's not in the wind. A Jewish tale retold by Faye Morgeson. Hannah had just finished washing her clothes at the village well and carried them back to her home to hang them on the clothesline. She didn't have a front yard or a backyard, so the clothesline was in the courtyard that she shared with her neighbors. She had a lot of clothes today. The clothes danced in the wind after she hung them up on the line. She took a moment to look at them there, clean and ready to dry, before she went inside to prepare her evening meal. A few minutes later, her neighbor Sarah came rushing out her front door on her way to her vegetable patch to harvest food for supper. She was late getting food ready and she was in a hurry. She knew her kids inside were playing quietly, but she didn't like having to make them wait for food. She rushed out and ran straight into Hannah's clothes that were hanging on the line, right in the middle of her path. And something kind of snapped in Sarah. She'd had enough. These clothes were always right in her way. She grabbed some shears from her basket and cut the clothesline. Watching the clothes tumble onto the ground, into the mud, before she continued on her way right off the Wonder board. 1 second. Hannah missed all of this. She hadn't been watching out her window. So when she came out a little while later to fetch some herbs from her herb garden, she kept in a little pot just outside. She saw the clothesline on the ground and could not believe her eyes. She clenched her fists. She knew at once who had done this. She began to walk straight towards Sarah's door, ready to pound on it, knocking as hard as she could until Sarah answered. And when Sarah answered, she knew she would have a thing or two to say to her. But just then, a gust of wind came into the courtyard. It blew in whirls and twirls, and it whispered. Suddenly, all Hannah could focus on was the feeling of being in this wind, the way that it shifted her clothes on her body, the sounds it made against the clothes and the bush and the trees nearby. Suddenly, she didn't only feel anger in her body. She relaxed a little bit. She thought of Sarah, not with anger right now, but she remembered Sarah gently. She thought of Sarah, watching Sarah rush across the courtyard with her children, and remembered admiring her for her unwavering patience with her 3 little babies. She felt calmer. She unclenched her fists. She picked her clothes up off the ground. She went back to the well calmly, rinsed them out, and then hung them back up on the line, moving the line a little bit today so that Sarah would have a path to come home to her door. She went back inside and closed the door, humming a little tune as she went. Before long, Hannah's husband came home. Usually, Hannah really liked to recount every detail of the day, remembering exactly how it made her feel. But the wind seemed to jostle a little bit, and she decided she doesn't have to retell every story. Instead, she sat quietly with him, watching the sunset and the gentle movement of the trees in the wind. Meanwhile, Sarah had had a miserable day. She was fretting while she worked. All she could think about was how rude that was to cut the clothes, watching them soak with mud as she left. Why had she been so rash? Why had she cut the clothesline? When she got home, she was happy to see the clothes were hanging again, but once she was inside her house, she couldn't stop pacing back and forth, worrying about the unpleasant words that she was sure to receive from Hannah. Again and again, she thought she could hear Hannah walking up to her front door. But she never came. Now it was sunset, and Hannah still hadn't come. Sarah thought, oh dear, I think I need to go and ask for forgiveness myself instead of waiting to receive Hannah's anger. She made her way across the courtyard, carefully moving aside the clothes that still hung on the line to make her way through. She knocked kind of timidly on Hannah's door. When Hannah opened it, oh, where'd Hannah go? When Hannah opened it, Sarah was puzzled. Hannah was not scowling. Hannah did not immediately shout. She didn't even look worried. In fact, Hannah had a smile on her face, happy to see Sarah. Sarah started apologizing immediately. I'm so sorry. I was so rash. I didn't mean to. I really can't apologize enough. Hannah took Sarah's hands in her own as she said, "Today, I have learned something good. I have learned that the wind doesn't just dry clothes. The wind can sweep away anger." So I wonder, when has letting go of blaming someone made a difference in your life? When has connecting to the feeling of being in nature changed how you feel in your body? It's up to us to change the ways that we treat other people that hurt them, that keep us disconnected from each other, like shouting, like messing up each other's things. How can we remember all of our choices that we have, especially our choices to act in line with our values, even when we feel irritated and upset? And finally, what are some important steps for creating peace at home, in your neighborhood, and around the world? I invite our children to join me in our children's chapel today. We will continue exploring this theme. Our children's chapel is an interactive worship space held in a separate meeting room. The Zoom ID for that will appear in your chat. Adults, please sing the children to their religious exploration space. The words will appear on your screen.
May your mind be open to new learning. May your lips bring truth into the world. May your heart know love and your hands do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace.
With your generous gifts, we support our justice outreach. This month, our attention is focused on our fellowship's own Pay It Forward Fund. We thank you for your generosity. The offering will now be received. Each week we take time to acknowledge the many joys among us and to grieve our many sorrows and losses so that we might lift the burden for each other. As Mike performs the familiar hymn, Peace Like a River, please feel invited to write your joys and sorrows into the chat box and take a moment to read them, perhaps placing your hand over your heart. As we begin, please hold Carolyn Bevington and her father in your hearts. The health of her dad, Jack, is failing, and he is in the hospital awaiting surgery. And please hold tenderly Mitchell Bethel, whose father, we have just learned, has just passed away. Trina asks that we pray for her mother in Florida, who is hospitalized with COVID. From Kat Reese, my Aunt Candace has been diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer. But there's also Mike's music and Jim's stories. Jeanette and Tom thank Mike and talk about their hike to Eagle Cap, even though it was difficult making it to the top. Bill and Gwen are grateful for the remarkable life of Pete Peterson, whose obituary was in the Statesman today. And Rhiannon McEwen, I can't read the last name. I'm sorry, Rhiannon. But they will meet their biological grandmother over Zoom for the first time. What a joy. Gail wants us to remember the suffering in Lebanon and Palestine. And Janet McClellan is grateful for this community. Let us pray. God of many names and no name known to us, we understand the impulse to pray for deliverance from pain, from injustice, despair, illness, separation, and death, the very sorrows we have expressed among ourselves this morning. We ask that the comfort of this beloved community give us the strength we need to endure sorrow and to carry on. We also understand that sometimes it is not deliverance from pain that will answer our prayers, but rather the courage and compassion to acknowledge our own mortal fears and sometimes our own moral weaknesses. Only with this compassionate self-acceptance can we learn to pray not for deliverance, but when called for personal development. In this way might we accept reconciliation where it is offered and atone for our past behavior where it is needed, so that we might heal a broken world. Amen, and may it be so. I'd like to invite Mark to come forward and deliver his sermon for us this morning.
Thank you, Debra. And it's good to see so many of my good friends out there. I hope you're all well. The title of my sermon this morning is Atonement. Here are some synonyms for atonement: recompense, redress, restitution, reparation, penance, amends. Racism has deep roots in my family. My mother's father, who was a farmhand, died when he was struck in the head by a hay hook in 1925. My mother was 3 years old. My grandmother moved the family of 5 children to Mobridge in north central South Dakota. Mobridge is located on the east side of the Missouri River. The Standing Rock Indian Lakota Reservation is on the west side, and many Native people shared their time between the two places. There in Mobridge, my grandmother struggled to feed her 5 children. To eat, they would take wormy flour that was being thrown away. The children would pick the worms out and they would use the flour. The worms would have had more nutrition. To provide food for her family during the Great Depression, my grandmother turned to prostitution. She had a son by a Lakota man, bringing shame and derision on the entire family. At the age of 7, my mother took a pistol to the home of the Native man who had fathered her brother. She demanded that the man never visit their house again. When my grandmother remarried, her new husband hated the Native boy and would not allow him in the house. My mother would smuggle her brother into the dirt cellar under the house through the coal chute. When the stepdad would find the boy there, he would beat him viciously and throw him out into the winter's 30 below weather. My father was raised poor in Missouri, but no matter how poor, he believed himself better than the blacks, who he never called blacks. It was the way of many white folks impoverished in the South, and there was comfort and pride in that sense of false superiority. He said he left the South in the early 40s to get away from the blacks and to find work. In South Dakota, he found work on the railroad and took my mother out of poverty and put her into servitude for life. His primary railroad route was from Aberdeen in northeast South Dakota to Mobridge again, where he had a room and a shared mistress. The Native people became the new object of his racism. Hate and vulgarity was the only way he referred to them. He was a violent man who beat my mother regularly but managed to keep it hidden from me. My father ruled his family with fear. He took with him to his grave the specter of racism and violence that has haunted our species since its inception. As I like nothing about my father, his racism was just one more thing to dislike and reject. I grew up in a lower middle class family on the wrong side of Aberdeen with a loving mother and a thankfully mostly absent father. The town was as white as the snow that buried it every winter. I can remember no sense of racism, as there was only one race. I went to undergraduate school in the town's small college, and as an art student in the late 60s, I and almost all my fellow students fell easily into the left-leaning liberal sense of the time. I went to graduate school in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and I finally had some exposure to Black people. But I can't remember thinking about racism. Our son went to school with and played with Black children. It just seemed natural. In 1976, I returned to Aberdeen to begin a 30-year teaching career at my old undergraduate school. In the 1980s and 90s, I was active in a state group called the South Dakota Peace and Justice Center. The primary focus of the group was to help reconcile between whites and Native people. In retrospect, I see using the word reconciliation was itself racist. What was needed was not for Native people and white people to reconcile, but for whites to redress the past and present grotesque mistreatment of Native people. I tried to use my talents to further the efforts of the organization by doing projects where I traveled to all the reservations in the state, doing interviews and portraits. The objective of the project was to present a different image of Native people from the negative one usually shown in the media. I met many wonderful people and observed the abject poverty of the reservations. I would not have believed that such living conditions existed in the North American continent. On Pine Ridge Reservation, per capita income, $4,000, 70% high school dropout rate. Average life expectancy for men, 52 years. 90% unemployment, and rampant alcoholism and suicide. I have never considered myself a racist, but I have known that I am a recipient of white privilege. It's only during this recent resurgence of Black Lives Matter that I have come to understand that my involvement in racism is deeper, much deeper. This realization has risen with more exposure to the conditions of Black people right now, and also the remarkable sermon our congregation experienced a month ago by Pastor Karen Hutt of Minneapolis. Pastor Hutt delivered this sermon 6 days after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. This May 31st sermon is available on YouTube. Search her name, Karen Hutt with 2 T's. When I say I benefit from white privilege, what I'm really saying is that I am benefiting and I have benefited from racism, not soft, cuddly white privilege. Sounds like something from Downton Abbey. It is racism and genocide that secured the land I lived on most of my life. It was not ancient history, but events that began less than 100 years before my birth. There has not been a break for a minute in the repression of Native people. I and most of us have been taught to be ignorant. I was not taught about the horrors of slavery. Certainly, I was never taught about the post-slavery Black massacres, the 4,473 lynchings, the countless massacres of Native people. It has been said that ignorance is bliss, but in this case, ignorance is complicity. It was coldly calculated ignorance imposed on me and all of those in our education system. But most of us happily joined in, even through the hints and signs that were always there. There is now lots of talk about police reform, but police reform is totally inadequate. It must be police transformation, prison transformation, justice transformation, education transformation, economic transformation, and more. The exclusion of Blacks from their rightful place in our economy opened more space for me and my success. I and every other white person in this nation has benefited from racism. Pastor Hutt's sermon gave me many insights, but the part that stunned me was her idea on hope. She said, hope is a deadly aspiration for Black people. This is something that had never entered my mind, but upon reflection, I see it as profoundly true. Political hope is a tremendous aid for the oppressor. Hope forestalls. Hope pacifies. Hope gives comfort to the bystander, such as me. I remember before hearing Pastor Hutt's sermon saying the following: the rise of the Black Matters movement gives me so much hope. Things might really change this time. End quote. What good does my hope do? None, except for maybe to make myself feel better. What is needed is not hope, but action. What is needed is strong prolonged, unflinching, disruptive action. If the George Floyd demonstrations in Minneapolis had been peaceful, do you think any national change would have resulted? Do you think they would have stimulated protests around the nation and around the world? I don't think so. Hope is not changing laws around our country. Action is. I do not feel guilt. Much like hope, guilt can do nothing to transform this country. Guilt does not translate into action. Two other widely used concepts when dealing with minority situations is empathy and compassion. Empathy means you feel what another person is feeling. Compassion means you have sympathy for what that other person is feeling. I most certainly cannot feel what a Black or Native person is feeling. From the smooth path of my white life, there is no way I can have any true understanding of the suffering these people have endured. I cannot identify with it. Like hope and guilt, empathy and compassion may give me some comfort, but without action, it does little or nothing to change the way things are now. Now I see my part in this long history of racism, or a fragment of my part. What am I to do about it? Am I responsible for my father's sins? Am I responsible for my mother's suffering? Am I to simply shrug my shoulders and say, I did not directly do any of this. It's not my fault. I like Black and Native people. No, that is not what I should do. By the way, I don't like all Black and Native people, as I most assuredly don't like all white people. I do admire our congregation members who have been on the front lines of recent demonstrations here in Boise, but that may not be enough. We can all help according to our abilities and our resources. I feel I should use some of those financial resources I have gained partly as being a white beneficiary of racism to support Black Lives Matter. I must support Native people who have the courage to continue this long, long struggle. The Lakota People's Law Project is an organization working for Native land and treaty rights, and I will support them. I must do everything I can to help make reparations happen for Black and Native people in this country. The average family wealth of white families is 10 times that of the average Black family. The concept of reparations is widely misunderstood. Some whites think it means big checks being sent directly to each Black person. Generally, that is not the case. Reformers believe that programs should be developed for the payment of college tuition, forgiveness of student loans, grants for housing revitalization, and other projects to build Black and Native peoples' communities and economies. And I believe these programs should be administered by Black and Native peoples' councils. Another worry about reparations is predictable, but where will the money come from? Since 2001, the US has spent $6.4 trillion on wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Pakistan. Just months ago, our Congress very quickly found trillions to give to mostly white people, white banks, white corporations when the COVID crisis began. The money is here. It's here right now. And reparations have waited far, far too long. As Reverend Hutt said in her sermon, time's up. It seems overwhelming to have to deal with this right now. We are experiencing a true existential threat from the pandemic. Over 162,000 Americans have died so far. The crisis has been criminally mismanaged by the mentally ill man that is in charge of our country. In the middle of this crisis, Black Lives Matter movement has risen and is demanding change. And millions of white people are supporting them. I wonder if the new and unforeseen threat white people are experiencing from disease is consciously or unconsciously part of the reason for their support of political and social change. Maybe we can now understand a small piece of what it's like to live in fear daily and see how this has been inflicted on Black and Native people for centuries. This was a very difficult sermon to write. In my career, I did 4 large projects dealing with Native people and Native history. I felt I had some understanding, but it was not until Pastor Hutt's sermon that something clicked and my understanding transcended the historical and the intellectual and reached my heart. We are at a time that offers opportunity for real change for Black and Native people in this country, more so than any time in my lifetime and maybe a long time before. You must make up your minds what to do through your understanding, your experience, and your heart. It's not time to wait for others to solve these festering problems. Now, each of us must take action. In these difficult days, we have reached a time of atonement. Midakuye Oyasan, which translates from Lakota, we are all related. Thank you.
Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide.
No one stands alone, we'll stand stand side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide.
Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle wide.
Draw the circle wide. Draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide. Draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide.
And now, if you would, put your hands over your heart, or hold the hand of the beloved next to you, or the paw. Indeed, let us take one more step. Let us draw the circle wider still. Let us acknowledge with the poets that justice on earth is an eternal endeavor. It may not reward us in our lifetime, but our lives are diminished if we do not in some way contribute to making, in the words of John Lewis, good trouble. May the words that Mark shared with us today give us the courage to confront our own comfort and prejudices with honest assessment, with compassion that encourages change rather than denial, and with the resolve to act, to interfere, to disrupt, to do our part to heal the world. Amen. Blessed be. Go in peace. In just a few minutes, we will be breaking out for coffee hour to discuss the service and checking in with each other, holding ourselves in love. You will be invited to join a breakout room. If you would like to attend the Inquirer's session today, please click Later when the breakout room option comes up. We will invite you to the Inquirer's session, which today is Worship and the Liturgical Year. It will begin in approximately 10 minutes.